So today I want to talk about a big topic, the Dharma. And because it's one of those big topics, I'm going to come at it kind of sideways. So I'll tell you a story. So once upon a time, a snowflake fell from the clouds. This beautiful crystalline structure just fell way up in the mountains and landed amongst all of these other snowflakes, and they all reveled in their uniqueness and their beauty of these wonderful shimmery crystalline structures that they were. And eventually the sun shone down on them and they melted and they freaked out. And the snowflake freaked out. I'm losing my beauty. I'm falling apart. And then the wind came, the night fell, and it froze again back into a slightly different shape, but still beautiful crystalline structure. It's like, whew, all okay. I'm back together again. And this happened over and over again, where the snowflake would melt and then reform back into ice. And eventually it found its way to a river. And in this river, it was no longer a crystalline structure, but it was still a droplet. It still had that sense of identity. A little more fluid, not quite so much fear. And it swirled around with all these other droplets and had all sorts of adventures. Spent some time in a lake for a while. Went and seeped into the ground. Hung out there, popped back out, wound up back in the lake, evaporated again up into the clouds, and then fell back as another snowflake. But by then it had forgotten all of its previous adventures. And then once again, it was this beautiful crystalline structure. Saying, look at how beautiful I am. Look at how beautiful you are. All the unique snowflakes. And the cycle goes on and on. But eventually there's this draw, this pull, this notion that, wait, there's something more. And the snowflake again, would melt and reform and eventually found its way to this river where it was a droplet of water, fluid and flowing. And so many different opportunities for adventure would arise. And so once again, it would get pulled into these different experiences. But there was this deep longing, this deep knowing that there was something. Couldn't quite name what it was, but it felt it. And it would flow with the river, and again, the cycle would happen again and again. And each time, that longing, that feeling, that knowing grew a little bit stronger. And eventually, the snowflake, this droplet of water, made it down the mountain. And it flowed through the valleys. And then again, spent time in a lake. Was evaporated up into the clouds and fell down again. And yet there was this pull, this this feeling of knowing. So as it fell as a snowflake, it just knew that I need to be in the river. I need to let the river take me. And so eventually, after enough cycles, after it went through endless adventures, it finally found its way to the river. But this time, as each diversion and attachment to experience arose, it instead chose to stay in the river. And eventually it met the ocean of Dharma. And as it dissolved into the ocean, it realized that all of this was Dharma. The snowflake, the mountain, the lakes, the clouds, even the earth, and the river itself was all Dharma, just flowing endlessly as creation unfolded. So each one of us is this snowflake that is falling over and over and over again. And if you're listening to this, then there is that knowing within you, that awakening to Dharma, that awakening that, oh wait, I'm not just this crystalline structure. I'm not as solid as I think. There's something more. And so we start to look for the river. And if we start to look, it's really not that hard to find. But the challenge is actually staying with the river all the way to the ocean. Because just like that droplet of water along the pathway along the river, there's many, many diversions. There's many opportunities for experience. And it's not that any of them are good or bad. That's just something that we add to it. That's something that we decide. But when we're in it, it certainly feels good or bad. There's certainly a feeling that some things create pleasure and some things create pain. And that happens all within our crystalline structure of individuality. And then we remember that, oh wait, I need to find the river again. And then we find our way back to the river. And there is a flow that's taking us to the ocean. And that flow is the Dharma. So on a very practical level, if we release our attachments, if we surrender this clinging to our individuality, we will naturally flow with the river of Dharma. There's nothing that we as an individual need to do. So we don't get up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to do Dharma today. Although there's a part of us that likes to think that. Say, oh, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to practice mindfulness, I do my contemplation, and that's my Dharma. And yes and no. Those are practices that open us to what already is, that reveal that river to us. When we get caught up in experience, then we wind up participating in the dance of karma, which is a whole discussion unto itself. So I won't go into too much detail, but it's hard to talk about Dharma without mentioning karma. So karma is simply action. So there is a karma of Dharma, I suppose. But the karma of Dharma has no individual. It has no wants. It has no attachments. There is just this flow, this movement of light. But when we are our snowflake selves, our droplet of water, that crystalline structure that we cling to, then we become involved in individual karma. We become involved in all these side quests. And we're flowing in this beautiful river of Dharma, and it's taking us through exactly what we need to experience. And then there's a branch, and it just diverts the water. And we have that moment of choice of, if we just relax completely without any resistance, it will take us past the branch. But if we tighten up and we decide that branch should not be there, this is not how it's supposed to be, then we get diverted. And we wind up having a karmic experience related to that clinging, related to that resistance. So as we move through life, as part of our practice, we pay very close attention to where we feel resistance. And this can be a tricky practice because I'm not talking about becoming a doormat where you just let everyone and everything walk all over you. That's not Dharma. That's just a different type of karma. Rather, it's looking very, very closely at where it is that you are clinging to this experience of life as an individual, as a crystalline structure that has a particular form. So the person that goes through life as this doormat getting walked over, that is their persona. That is their attachment in a certain way. It's twisted and painful, but it provides a sense of self, a sense of, this is who I am, the martyr. And we all have that quality within us to be the martyr at one point or another. Just as we all have the quality to be the hero and save the person who is the victim. We all have the quality to be the aggressor as well. So as we do this dance with Dharma, as we flow in this river, we start to observe and see all of these different formations that arise within us and around us. And if we're paying very close attention, we can notice when a certain judgment arises in us and says, oh yes, I want to be that. Or, oh no, I don't want to be that. Those are both the same judgment, whether we want something or don't want something. It's still a clinging to being a certain something. So rather, our practice is deeper than that. It requires 100% self-honesty, total humility, to watch oneself and notice that, oh, I'm hung up here. I want things to go this way, not that way. The branch in the river. We notice it and we decide that, oh, I want to go to the right and not the left. That's the type of resistance I'm talking about. So through our practice of meditation, when we sit in silence, this crystalline structure that we are so in love with, that we are so attached to, begins to dissolve, and it falls away, and we start to realize that we are not any particular way. And that gives birth to this sense of non-attachment, where when we reach that branch in the river, we see that it's equally delightful to go to the left as it is to the right. There's joy in either way. So it's important to notice that this non-attachment that arises naturally is not at all a sense of disassociation. It's not at all an escape. If anything, it's an embracing of what actually is. It's opening and fully accepting this full present moment in its entire glory, without resistance. And this is a practice that grows and develops. As we practice mindfulness and become aware of the games our mind plays, as we get better at directing our mind towards beauty and gratitude, and holding ourselves in very high states, there's a part of us that will emerge and say, okay, today I'm going to be non-attached. And that doesn't work that way. We can aspire to that, but if we set out our intent and say, I'm not going to be attached today, what we have essentially done is we've just created another attachment to non-attachment. So I will save you that pain if you want. And instead, just practice meditation. Let the snowflake melt into the droplet of water. Allow the droplet of water to dissolve completely into the river of Dharma. And become familiar with what that feels like. Because you know what it feels like deep down. It's that knowing. that everything is. And when you depart the river of Dharma, you feel it. Because there's a sense that things are off. There's a sense of disconnection. That you've made your world really, really small. That you've hardened this little droplet of water that you are. And so when that happens, very gently find your way back to the silence of meditation. Find that spaciousness within the cells of your being. And surrender to that. And all on its own, that river of Dharma will just rise up and carry you. And it will eventually take you all the way to the ocean, where we all ultimately dissolve as one. So let's practice some more meditation. So we'll do the chakra meditation. We'll spend the first song on the navel center, allowing your attention to rest. And again, really work on feeling the spaciousness within you. So as you're focusing on the navel center, allow your attention to penetrate deep into your being and just experience the openness that is there. And when the second song comes on, move the attention up to the heart and feel all the different energies of that space. Notice, is it the same? Is it different? Can you open more here than you could in the navel center? And when the third song comes on, move your attention up again to the third eye. And once again, let your attention rest and open into that spaciousness within all the cells of your being. And notice what it feels like. We're not trying to make anything happen. We're just here to experience what actually is. being in the river of Dharma is not a passive experience. I know it can sound like it is, like, oh, just surrender to the river of Dharma, kick back and do nothing. But we are active beings. We cannot help but do. We are motion itself. So we meditate and find that stillness, that spaciousness, so we can listen, so we can feel that very quiet knowingness. And then we act. And when we do, at least for me in my experience, there is a telltale yesness when we are in the river of Dharma, when we are connected. Sometimes it's very exuberant, and you just feel like, yes, this is where I belong. This is exactly what I need to be doing right now. And it's very exciting. It feels wonderful. And then other times it's very, very quiet. It's just this very gentle stillness of, oh yes, I'm here. So what that activity looks like on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment time frame, looks very different. But we are engaged when we're doing it. So sometimes the Dharma means to rest. And, in this culture, we don't put a very high value on rest. Anyway, it's an afterthought. But if you think of rest as a dharmic activity, then there's some preparation or some action that goes with it. So, okay, I need to rest. So what's going to be the dharmic place to rest? Do I need some cushions under my knees? If I can't sleep, then what kind of entertainment do I need? Do I need catharsis? So I'm going to watch like a horror movie. Or do I need something uplifting? And so I'll watch something like that. Or do I want to read a book? Or is reading not enough rest? Or do I need something mindless, like I need to watch HGTV? So even something like resting can be a dharmic activity if we listen to what it is that we need to do. And then more often, there are things that we need to do for our home, our career, our friends, our well-being. And so if we listen, then we find ourselves in the river of Dharma and doing what needs to be done in that moment without resistance. When we see the trash can is full, and we can do that with a whole lot of resistance and fight it and get it done. So yes, the activity was done, but it wasn't done in a dharmic way. A dharmic way would be to recognize, oh, the trash needs to go out, let me do that. And there's not all this extra stuff. Because, a simple activity like that can go either way. There can be all this resistance and complaining, and I don't want to do this. Or it can go the other way, where it's like, oh, I'm so wonderful, I took out the trash, I'm such a great person. And both ways leads us out of the river and into the karmic flow of the individual. But simply just doing the action because it needs to be done and it has nothing to do with us personally, then we're in the flow of Dharma. So play with that this week. See where it takes you. Notice where that resistance arises. Notice where that clinging to yourself as an individual, as a snowflake, your brilliant crystalline structure that you want to protect. Notice when that happens. And oftentimes that awareness itself of just noticing and becoming aware of it melts that structure, and you find yourself a little more free.